Welcome to a new episode of the State of the Net podcast. I'm Paolo Valdemarin.
And I'm Ewan Simple.
And I think that on this episode, I wanted to start from a post that you wrote recently on Facebook about reality and about how we perceive reality and what reality. Why don't you?
Well, the post was just raising the issue that we, for all sorts of familiar reasons in a sense, culture, previous experience, biological differences in how our organs work and our sense organs work, but basically the real world that we all believe we exist in is largely created by our brains. Our ears feed sounds into our brains, our eyes feed light into our brains, but what that means, even at a very basic sense of colour, I mean, we can disagree about colour. One person thinks they're looking at brown and another one thinks they're looking at green. But when you kind of extrapolate that up into our experience of the world around us and what it means, we are living in potentially quite radically different parallel universes that we sort of fall into the trap of thinking is the one universe. And I made the point in the post that, you know, people's counter to that is, oh, that's just solipsistic, you're just claiming that you're creating the world. And I'm saying, well, no, I'm not saying that, because there is a physical reality. When I crashed my truck into the weighbridge last week, it made a physical dent. But what that dent meant was up to me, and the interpretation of it, the guilt, the frustration, the annoyance, that reality was constructed in a sense. And the point of the post was that to remember this when we're dealing with other people, that they will be constructing their own very convincing and to them very real reality, but which might be very different from ours. And we were just chatting there about how this relates to the internet.
Yeah. As I read your post, I started thinking about. I was literally at the same time reading about a number of different conspiracy theories that have that are prominent in these days. One is Epstein, who died apparently by suicide, and as I say, apparently, I'm just falling into it. Immediately there was these two different sides trying to interpret something that is not a fact from this event. Even more interesting to point out, there is an article, I was reading an article this morning about the president of Turkmenistan that according to some is dead and according to some other is not. And there is this huge debate raging on social media and mainstream media about is he alive or not. So the tension I felt between the attraction between these two, your post and this news, was that it would appear that it is very easy to not only live in your own reality, but actually choose your own reality, choose the newscape that you want to perceive.
Well, it's actually hard not to live in your own reality.
Well, exactly.
I was just having a conversation with somebody this afternoon about populism and the gameability of the mob, for want of a better word, and which has always been possible, but potentially becoming more possible. And to some extent, perception is reality, because if enough people believe something and act on the basis of that, however false it is, that turns the world. And you know, we were saying the thing about trying to manipulate this, or trying to determine the truth, or trying to make people stick to a truth, ends up with ideologies and morals and rules which are problematic, to say the least. Being aware of the fact that we're living in this to some degree constructed reality helps us to react differently to it. And I think being aware on the internet of the potential for manipulation, populism, all those other risks will make each of us in possibly very small and very subtle ways, react differently.
I think that yes, definitely. Being aware, the more aware we are of the partiality of what we see and the fact that we see everything from an angle, is the more likely we are to be mindful in that and to be in the moment. I think that there has been a shift from the olden days. I mean, we always mention, the good old times where the BBC would just stating the truth, and the fact that of course that was a point of view, but because we were both reacting to the same stimuli, at least we might have had different angles about one thing.
Yeah.
While today it might very well be that if we have different points of view, we're seeing two completely different realities, and this is a beauty of it. This is the fact that,
and the pain. Yeah.
But also this is a challenge: is being aware of everything we see and the nuances, and the fact that my default position when I see every piece of content these days is. It's probably not completely true. It's a point of view. It's something that is interesting. It's something that it's a data point that I use to try to build a view. But I'm aware that it's just a data point coming from a very specific.
And even what you have built is just a view.
I recently saw the documentary on Netflix, The Great Hack, about the story of Cambridge Analytica and Brexit and Trump, and they create this idea of how the company was manipulating a large amount of voters. And as I was watching the story, it's mostly I was aware of what happened and how it happened. And it was interesting, and I think it's very good that more people hear that story. Yep. But at the same time, the way the story is presented comes from an angle. So, they talk about Facebook and all the bad thing that Facebook did, and to some degree, there were behavior that Facebook could have managed better. But then they say. And in Brazil, this other thing happened on WhatsApp, and WhatsApp belonged to Facebook. It's like it's a completely different thing.
Nasty social media.
You're just clustering things together.
Yeah.
Or there are recordings of Alexander Nix, the CEO of Cambridge Analytica, pitching to a client and basically saying how they did this, they did that, and it's highly compromising in perspective. Yeah. But then I think all the time I was pitching something, I was lying through. I mean, it's the fact that you just make things bigger than they actually are. It's like the default thing that you do as a salesperson. Yeah. And I'm thinking if somebody was to record my sales pitch and play it back at some point, I'm not completely sure. So the fact that they try a little bit too hard to make people look guilty or involved in things is I'm not completely comfortable with that.
No, but it's a very rare journalist who doesn't do that to some degree. Even by the choice of who you interview, there's a perspective. There's a story that you're trying to tell.
Absolutely, or how you interview someone.
Exactly, totally. But you see that, and we've sort of touched on this before, but even within our own heads, we have much less control than we think we do. We don't, back to my story about being in the bath and trying to observe myself making the decision to stand up and never managing to do so. Thoughts happen to us largely. And this is what you begin to learn when you get into meditation. They arrive, they appear. You don't decide to think something. You find yourself thinking something. And that's true of all thoughts, and that's true of thoughts of what to do next. And the degree, it sounds like determinism, and maybe that's the case, but what we end up doing is a complex mix of conditioning, culture, previous experience, and random chance.
I think yes. I think that what is interesting from the perspective of our podcast is when what we think is actually influenced by algorithms without us being aware of how these works or what the purpose of these algorithms are. There were a couple of articles I read recently about the YouTube recommendation algorithm. There is a good piece on the New York Times saying, looking at the story of the last elections in Brazil and saying how YouTube was actually very important in promoting some, again, conspiracy theory that supported the administration who won.
But even though you've just described that, was it an unfortunate and unforeseen consequence of the nature of the YouTube algorithm?
Absolutely.
Or was
I don't think that was done on purpose by Google. No, yeah. I think that it just happened.
Yeah.
What is also interesting
either, does it?
What is also interesting is that apparently there was another article on the Huffington Post stating that that Google changed the YouTube recommendation algorithm. So if you're watching a video from a conspiracy theory channel, you, instead of recommending another video from the same channel, for some reason you end up on Fox News. So these days, Fox News is getting a lot of traffic from people looking at conspiracy theories. And it's probably, and again, I think it's a bug in the algorithm. It's the algorithm saying, okay, I'm not sending you to one of these other things because I know that it's wrong. But I don't have anything else.
We get into such dodgy and interesting territory when we think of the bugs in the algorithm of life. You know, if our attempts to intervene haven't gone well historically, because they become ideological or moral codes or there has been a little bit of improvement in humankind in the last few thousand years, one might argue. We got rid of like slavery or a few things that well, I mean, like not I think we just move the shit around. I think sometimes think we find new ways to behave badly with each other rather than ending up in some...
Yeah, but if you look at the number of people that were killed in war, for example, the number has been... Now, I'm not saying that insulting somebody on Twitter is not bad, but it's better than invading their country and shooting them. Well, to some degree.
Well...
there are less war. I mean...
Well, see, funnily enough, I just saw an article just today, yet again raising that topic about it's been too long since we've had a war. We're ending up in this mess because we've had...
Yeah, well, it's like a little bit...
Lack of focus, or what, you know...
Yeah, a little, you know, a nice famine from time to time, just
it's
clean
not as
things
bad
out.
As it's made out. That's right,
yeah.
Especially if it doesn't happen to you.
No, I'm a slightly more optimistic from this point of view. I think that we are doing better than we were, but I think that we're dealing with a whole number of new challenges that we are facing exactly because we're not facing the old challenges.
Yes,
anymore.
that was more my point.
It's
which is going back to another post that I did about distracting ourselves, and that we are encouraged to distract ourselves with buying stuff or filling our days being busy or filling our heads with words from other people or whatever, and all of this is to avoid, in a sense, the inward challenge of working out what's going on and who we are and all that sort of stuff. And I think we just, as I say, sort of invent, and you could include wars and all those things in displacement activities. And these are problems that have been around for millennia. You know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that it is talking of distracting yourselves and going on the... I'm sure that people will be listening to this podcast after hours.
That's right.
But there are fascinating research about how access to porn has changed behavior of not only access to porn but also access to dating platforms.
Yes.
I mean, the fact that mating has become easy basically means that males are not competing anymore, and there are implications of this on evolution,
for culture,
and culture, of just like being better people, because you don't need to be a better person anymore. You can just swipe left until you find somebody.
Or you don't have to be. You don't have to be an aggressive, pushy so to beat off
jerk.
Competition either.
It's
interesting, isn't it?
So it is. I think that there are interesting aspects that technology has introduced that are changing some very basic sociological dynamics that are actually changing. So go back to being optimistic. This is where I got excited in the old ideological days of the early days of the internet, about it helping us to understand how connected we are and how we're all falsely seeing ourselves as separate parts of an indivisible whole. And in a way, that's what we're seeing, isn't it? It's stripping away some of the apparently inevitable physical constraints that we've been molded by thus far in evolution. And yes, the optimistic scenario is that we are groping our way up an evolutionary scale. Yeah, I mean, in my mind, we are a point on the wheel of a bicycle moving forward, and this point, sometimes it moves forward very fast, sometimes it looks like it's going back before it starts going forward again. So we have this odd, we're not moving forward at the constant speed. I think that right now we almost feel like we're moving backwards.
There's a puncture at the moment.
Yeah, well, in 6 weeks from Brexit, or it feels.
The wheels will come off the bloody bike.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like a very good moment.
Well,
history.
It doesn't, because again, I'm foolishly half full about things, and as we were just chatting about, these are big shifts potentially and a falling apart of a set of norms and assumptions and institutions and behaviours and blah 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 that have been past their sell-by date for some time. It will be rough, it will hurt, but we'll probably come out of it better.
If you read about it, I mean, some of the idealists behind what is happening are basically coming from the point of view that you need to destroy what exists before you can rebuild it, which is a anarchic view that at least you liked anarchy for some time, didn't you?
Well, I find it funny when people talk about the ideology of anarchism, because it isn't, in a sense, it's more of a skepticism than a. It's not having those kind of rules. And it's bad to think about technology. When we try to intervene, almost when we try to do the right thing, and then our right thing is different from somebody else's right thing, that's where it kind of goes wrong, because we mess up. I mean, I'm falling into the trap these days of believing that there is an order to it, and there is a sense to it all. Not in the sense of a beardy guy in the sky controlling it, God, but life kind of works. Life is seen not to work when we intervene, when we start raping the planet, when we start acting in ways that aren't congruent with the ways that we really are, when we try to be something that we're not, so in a way, it's almost an attempt to fix things is almost the last thing we should be doing. Which sounds incredibly passive and laissez-faire and hippy-dippy, I know, but I'm becoming more and more convinced of it. Look at organisations. I've just talked to somebody senior in an organisation recently, and how many times their organisation has been bombarded and buffeted by some new chief exec who's going to solve things and fix things and comes wading in and makes things worse.
At the same time, if we were not isn't inventing new things part of trying to change reality? And if we were not inventing new things, there would be no internet and no sophisticated trucks.
But each invention, like the nuclear fusion, isn't in itself inherently a good thing.
No, nor a bad thing, but it's change. I mean, do we want to be actors of change or not? If we are trying to change things, then a sizable amount of time we'll fuck up and make mistakes, and then we'll need to fix them or try to fix them, and probably by trying to fix things we'll do even worse.
Yeah.
But because I think I see that overall, even with all the problems that we have, maybe not as a species, but at least as a society, we seem to be doing better than we were some time ago. I think that we are on a positive trend. It doesn't mean that there is a lot of stuff that we did that needs to be fixing, and probably there is a lot of stuff that we should not try to change because it's just fine the way it is.
So circling back to the beginning of the conversation and the multiple truths and multiple realities, some of the motives and power behind the current populism is a sense that we're not getting better, that we're getting worse. And people want to stand up for what they think is better. You know, they don't want a multicultural, multiracial, blah blah world. They're beginning to fight hard to prevent that happening. So they don't think this is progress. They don't think this is we're getting better. They think we're getting worse.
Oh yeah, but that is why that is typically the type of people I disagree with. It's which mean that I think that it's getting better. I think that the narrative, again, it's always something that exists only in our minds, right?
Yeah.
I mean, things are not going better or worse. Things are just there, right?
The only thing we can be sure of is that we're both sitting here.
Again, I can find a whole bunch of data that says that things are going better.
That's
you can
right.
find a whole bunch of data that things are going worse, and we will.
And neither of us have a clue what's going to happen next.
Absolutely, and probably we'll both be lying about half of the data we're
Exactly.
there. But at the same time, I think that it is what is interesting and what is powerful of the tools that we have today and the digital world that we live into, at least partially, is that it does allow us to cope with complexity in a way that we couldn't before. I mean, we have
its own
tools.
complexity. In many ways, it generates its own. It increases complexity.
It does.
Yeah.
But at the same time, complexity, given the complexity, is something that always existed.
Yes.
I mean, it's true.
Well,
that,
yes, maybe it's finally allowing us to reflect the actual complexity of the world and deal with that, rather than try to over-manage or oversimplify or over whatever.
Exactly. It's. I think that. I like the trend of starting to appreciate the complexity of things instead of trying to find simple solution to complex problems.
Totally.
I probably what I fight most in my daily work is a simple solution to complex problems.
Yep.
Because everybody at every point is, there must be a simple way of doing this. Instead, I'm sure there is, and it's going to be completely wrong because it's a complex thing.
Yeah.
Everybody who's looking for a yes/no answer to complex problems is and because we can manage more and more data, because we can see more and more things, because we can use new and more sophisticated processes to make decisions, taking into account a vast amount of information and data, I think that we have tools that allow us to cope with complexity better than ever in history. It is true, maybe these tools are creating a little bit more complexity, but I think it's just a little bit of more complexity on top of a universe which is way more complicated we can cope anyway.
Yes, but again, the reality of those who want a black or white solution is that the world it ought to be simple, and there ought to be structure and rules, and if we only would all acknowledge that and play by those rules, everything would be all right.
And that is what I'm fighting.
Yes.
That is, if I want to, and I'm sort of realizing this as we're talking today, but I probably one of the best way for me to decide if this a position I agree with or is a position I do not agree with. Is this trying to find a simple problem to a simple solution to a complex problem?
Yeah.
If that is the case, as tempting as it is it's the fascination essentially of fascism.
Right.
Fascism is attractive because it proposes these simple solutions that everybody can relate to. I mean, it's like there is an inner part of all of us that say, "Oh, if only that was true."
And so that goes back to the thing about displacement and about the discomfort we feel with facing the complexity and the unpredictability of life. We want to be told that it's easy. We want to be given the answer. We want to just fit into a system. But of course, we then become deeply unhappy because we know deep down that that's not true.
We do, but I think that at least to some degree we are seeing a moment where it would appear that there is a majority, or at least a relative majority of people who are trying to find that simple solution or are attracted by the simple solution. And I think that the interesting thing is that, again, it's not changing the number of people that have that kind of idea or desire has not increased.
No.
It's just more apparent today than it was before.
Yes.
It's not that during the Obama administration there were no racists and suddenly all Americans turned racist. It's just the amount of people with a racist point of view has probably been exactly the same. It's just that for some reason the conditions now allow us to see that aspect while we don't see other aspects of society. Because again, it's all multifaceted and you always see different angles and different perspective, and we have different understanding of something that maybe doesn't change that much.
I normally argue that, but I've, again, during this conversation, sort of realizing that if, back to the YouTube algorithm amplifying certain signals in the system around that election in Brazil, we might be creating more of a certain attitude or a certain view, inadvertently perhaps. It's back this thing about no such thing as a neutral algorithm. It even in an unintended manner.
Oh, but if you think, I mean, in the last few weeks we had a number of shootings in the States, and at least some of these were triggered by people who radicalized on 8chan or on some of these sites. And if you think how sad it is that somebody becomes so upset to decide to go and essentially kill himself while trying to take in as many people with him as he can. Because I mean, from what I have read, they go expecting to be killed. So it's incredibly sad, and I mean, you really need to be desperate to do that. So somebody got to that point.
But so that's interesting, because I was watching a bit of the last series of Sherlock. My daughter was watching it with her boyfriend, and there was some quite sick, sinister. It was meant to be being sort of dark and frightening, or whatever. But I just thought, why do people write stories like this? So I ended up getting up and walking out the room because I don't want to see that. And then you get the whole thing about, do violent games cause people to be violent, or do they assuage the natural instinct to be violent and take it down, less blah blah blah. And then I also found myself thinking on the way here actually about people who get arrested for say paedophilia. Somebody who's going to do something as extreme as that has got to the position where they don't care. The normal constraints of social approval or disapproval or whatever don't operate. They don't care. They're going to do it anyway. And it's a bit like those shooters. Their reality is so extreme, but so, madness is being in a majority of one.
I think that what would be interesting to understand is how much algorithms potentially can have an influence on this, because if they can accelerate a cycle that in nature, in regular environments, would not get that fast. You would not, because I can see how.
Well, but
the
algorithm's not natural.
But look, I mean, the YouTube algorithm. I mean, it's a dangerous thing. I don't know how much time I have wasted in the last year watching, Japanese joinery. And it's fascinating. The problem is you watch one, you get another one, and another one, and another one.
I've not been afflicted
and
by
it's
that.
and thanks God I watched Japanese joinery, but I know how compelling that can be. And I'm sure that if we were,
There's been other compulsions.
I have had situations where I've seen interviews with people that I didn't particularly like, and then suddenly my whole world was filled with interviews with these guys. So again, I know how that works. I think I can try to control it to some degree. I mean, I can just say no, I don't want to see this.
So
I guess to some degree, what I would like to have is I would like to have YouTube Pro. I would like to be able to tweak the algorithm the way I want it.
Into your own echo chamber.
But it basically say, well, yes, but I would like to be able to see, okay, you're showing me this for these reasons. Like some of the reasons are just not true. Can I turn them off? So
interesting. And it's a conversation earlier today where we're talking about data and the use that data is put to, and credit ratings, and the fact that you can have an algorithmic misinterpretation of a situation can have a severe effect on your credit rating, and worse, in the future we'll have things that will decide whether we're socially acceptable or not that may or may not be true. They may just be an algorithm that ran amok and put two and two together and made five. And I found myself thinking, well, there's a product opportunity for a cleaning up algorithm, a tool that goes back in and resets, because the person was saying, the only answer I got was, you have to phone all the credit agencies to get your credit scores changed. And he said, I have no idea how to do that. I don't know what they are, who they are, how to get hold of them. And I'm thinking, there's a product.
Oh, I mean, there is a company. I have an app from a company that, to some degree, tries to do that, in a sense that it is showing my credit rating and it's trying to give me advice on what to do, how to change my behavior. It's not very aggressive. I mean, they're basically trying to sell me shit. But it is something that said, your credit rate has changed from this month to this month for this reason, because that happened. And it's crazy because it's like last month I had more expensive, so suddenly I was using a little bit of my overdraft, and my credit rating went up because I was using. It's like okay, hey, woohoo, more debt, and it's so there are apps that try to do that, but basically at that point you have another algorithm that is trying to tweak an original algorithm. Why don't we give me levers to the original algorithm, for fuck's sake?
It's almost spilling into magical thinking. I was thinking we want angel bots that go around cleaning up the world and making it a nicer place.
But angel bots, it's we don't want angel bots. I mean, it's like,
well, we did say earlier on in the conversation that there isn't a solution, and the desire. So we're not going to get to an end point in this podcast where we've come to a solution, where there is an answer to this problem. And we also said that being aware of these issues won't necessarily provide us with clarity about an answer or a solution, but it will help us to react and interact differently with the world around us. And I guess that's all we aspire to do for each other, if not for anybody else listening with this podcast.
So I think we can close this by saying that, guys, be aware of what you do and
know that you don't know.
Know what you don't know, and don't.
And please don't worry about it. It'll be all right.
Yeah, don't worry, and don't believe in angel bots. Thank you.
See you next time.